So I'm sitting here with Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll and Jeff Olsen at the International Association for Near-Death Studies conference here in Bellevue, Washington, and the conference is just sort of coming to its close, and really happy that I get to chat with you guys just a little bit, because your story, your presentation was staggering. It was really amazing. Jeff, you share really briefly, if you can.
Sure,
I know
sure.
I can't honor the story, but briefly what happened.
Sure. No, the condensed version is I was in a horrific automobile accident.
Right.
I was severely injured. My legs were crushed, the seatbelt had cut through me, my back was damaged, my right arm had almost been pulled off. I eventually lost the left leg. It was amputated above the knee, but then I had horrific infections and everything else. But at the scene of the accident, not only was I badly injured, but my wife and youngest son were killed in the accident instantly. The whole family was in the car. Me and my older son, who was 7 years old, survived. My wife and my youngest son did not. At that time, I left my body. I had a profound experience. I was able to say goodbye to my wife, who had passed on the other side, but then found myself wandering around a level 1 trauma ER center, and that's when I say wandering around, I was not in my body. My body was on the gurney being worked on, but I was finding my way back to the body, and had a profound experience as I did so, just encountering the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the families of the patients in such a way that I was experiencing them with this pure, unconditional love. I mean, they were me and I was them, and it was something that'll change me forever.
I want to emphasize there that the extent of your physical injuries was extreme.
Yes.
And the quality you just named as you moved about the hospital out of your body is not a quality that someone going through shock would experience. You had a profound sense of love.
Yes.
As you moved through.
Yes.
Not disassociation, not depersonalization, not emotionally flatlining, in fact, consciousness amplified.
Amplified. In fact, it was interesting because as I was experiencing everyone I saw, I mean, I knew their love, their hate, their motivations, their aspirations. I knew them as if they were me. I grew up in a conservative Christian home. We read the Bible, but this verse came to me, which was the famous verse, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it to me," which I embraced as a nice verse about being nice, but here I was experiencing that they were me, and I was them. And I thought, wow, that what the Master knew was he was no different or better than the naked beggar in the street or the man in prison or any of that.
And we are all totally connected.
Yes, absolutely.
And you became connected to an ER doc who was there helping your physical body, and then turns out so much more. Dr. O'Driscoll, what were you experiencing?
Well, Jeff went to a local hospital first and got stabilized to the degree that they could, and then he got flown to our facility in another town, in a level 1 trauma center where I was on duty, and a trauma team was assembled that welcomed him into the ER, and I only came in later while the team was taking care of him. So I wasn't responsible for his care, but I walked in and saw him on the gurney. I saw him motionless and unconscious while people were working on him. And above him in the air, watching his care, was his recently deceased wife, who died at the scene.
You saw the spirit of his wife hovering above the bed.
Yes, I saw her, and she was communicating her profound gratitude for the care that was being provided. And in that moment, I had that immense flow of knowledge. I understood who she was. I understood that Jeff would live, that he'd lose his leg, and there was this incredible flow of knowledge that was available to people that were responsive and receptive to it.
Did this surprise you? Have you ever experienced something like that?
It surprised me slightly because of the magnitude of it, but I'd had enough other experiences that were similar that I was not too shaken by it. In fact, after a period of time, Jeff went off to the operating room, and I went back out into the department and finished my shift before going home for the night, never expecting to see Jeff again. It was only a month later that we met in his hospital room and talked about what I'd seen, and that first visit where he was well enough to talk was the first time I'd learned that he had any kind of a spiritual experience at the time of his near death.
Right.
And so that was the beginning of our 20-year friendship.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing because here I was, you know, I mean, I knew what had happened to me was real. I'm like, that's real. This is the foggy dream.
Yeah.
But suddenly, here's a clinician who I didn't know from Adam. He came in the room with the nurse, and it was really the nurse that was orchestrating this. I mean, you know, we've got to go see that man who lost his wife. We've got to tell him what we saw. The ER nurse, as well as Dr. O'Driscoll, had seen this apparition, but they had no idea who I was or what I'd experienced. But from my perspective, when here I have a team of medical staff who don't know me. I mean, had my mother come in and said, oh, you know, we saw, I mean, that would have been beautiful, but here were people that didn't know me saying, we had this experience, and it was very validating in many ways to me to think, okay, what I was experiencing was not crazy, was not unreal. Here were others that were experiencing the same thing at the same time in a very profound way, too.
These things happen all the time.
All the time.
In the emergency department. And some people speak of them and most people don't. And the people that do speak of them often speak of them in hushed tones, in small groups, or individual one-on-one conversations, not broadly for a lot of people to hear. And it's typical for people to wait 5 to 7 years to even talk about their experiences. That was about how long Jeff waited. And he waited 10 years to write his first book about his experience. And I waited an additional 10 years before I finally shared and wrote down some of my experiences in the emergency department, including the one we've just described.
Do you find that medical professionals you've worked with also occasionally have these mystical experiences or see something beyond the physical?
Yeah, there are a small group of people, a small percentage of them that have occasional experiences. There's probably a few more that we don't know about, that never talk about them. These things tend to be underreported, but they're much more common than we generally appreciate. Some studies suggest 4 to 5% of the general population have had a near-death experience. That's equivalent to 10 million people in the U.S.
I know as a chaplain, I've heard a story every month, sometimes a couple of months, for the past 20 years working in palliative and cancer care. And I certainly agree. It's a lot more common than we think, but understandable that we would hesitate in sharing.
I think there's a sense of sacredness that people don't want to violate by speaking of it indiscriminately. There's a caution about how will this be received, and will people think I'm off my nut?
Yeah.
And certainly in the health profession, there's a concern about how you'll be perceived by colleagues as well as by patients.
Yeah.
You know, it makes some patients uncomfortable. On the other hand, it's been studied, and most patients that have an NDE would like to talk with their healthcare provider about it. And not very many healthcare providers are willing or able to do so in a constructive way.
And but from my perspective, that's what was so cool, is here, you know, suddenly there was a level of trust where I thought, okay, I can share some of these things that I experienced, and if I am crazy, the doctor will tell me. He'll say, you know, you ought to get some professional help, but knowing that
I have told him since he needs to get professional help, but not over this issue.
Not over this issue. There's all kinds of things. But it was to have someone to talk to, and as a chaplain, I mean, what you do, from a patient's perspective, you're just going, wow, what just happened? It was so real. Am I losing my mind? Am I crazy? Do I dare talk to anyone about it?
Yes.
What are they going to say? I don't want to be in a psych ward. But knowing that there's a safe place to say, well, there's what I experienced, and what do you make of that, without judgments or comparison, was incredibly valuable for me in my healing, and just in the process of going through, okay, how do I make sense of what just took place?
And in dealing with the immense grief that you must have experienced.
Yeah.
It would profoundly shift the trajectory of that grief by providing you with this sense of they continue, that hope, that knowing that though they've died, that's their body, their essence and self is more than well, and then waiting for you on your day of transformation.
Yeah, I have. I have two pretty incredible angels that look out for me and,
Yeah.
and guide me, and I've never doubted that for a moment. But yeah, the grief. I mean, some people think, well, gosh, this man had a horrible accident. He had some profound spiritual experiences, and then he was okay. And that's not the
No.
thing. I had the accident. I had the profound spiritual experiences, but it was 10 years. It was a decade of picking up the pieces and putting together a life and being a single parent and getting back to work, and then the whole time grieving like anyone else would grieve. It's like we lost half our family.
Yes.
It was traumatic.
I love that you've said that so clearly. It's important not to let even such a transcendent mystical experience shorten or shortcut the sacred journey of grief, because your grief is the price you pay for your love, and it's a beautiful aspect of your humanity. And this sort of experience helps you hold that hope and feel that darkness at the same time, and you discover you continue despite the pain, and you will continue despite the death.
And I think it's very important to point out, obviously, but it's worth saying again, everybody grieves differently.
Yeah.
And his experiences may have changed the way he grieves, and my experiences changed the way I grieve, but there's grieving nonetheless, and there's a process of moving through it, as is obvious. But we can't judge another person's grief by their outside gestures and appearances, and that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah. And that room of grief is never fully closed. It becomes integrated as part of us, and but it also helps us love and feel this life to a new depth.
Yes, and the word that comes to my mind that I think is so critical from all of this is empathy. The grieving gives us a taste of empathy so that we can help others through the process.
Yeah, communion with those who suffer as well.
Yeah.
The name of your book, Jeff?
The book is called Knowing. Knowing, one
word.
One word, but it is. It handles the whole, a bit of a biography before the accident, what happened in the near-death, shared death, and after-death communications, and also picking up the pieces and putting a life back together. I mean, it's been quite a process.
I want to emphasize this book is eloquently written. Bring Kleenex. I mean, it is filled with such humanity, and it's amazing. Dr. Driscoll, your book is out, called?
Yes, my book is titled Not Yet, and it deals with some of the experiences I had for a few years prior to meeting Jeff that prepared me for that. And then the bulk of the book is the first year of our friendship together, and some of the experiences we shared and how they changed us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for chatting with me. Thanks for coming to the conference. And
It's an honor.
most of all, thank you for sharing your presentation the way you did. It was more of a conversation than a didactic. It flowed organically with such spiritual precision that just got to all of our hearts, and it was amazing. So keep doing it that way.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the work you do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so important. Thank you.
Yeah, love it. All right.
Great.